Hey, welcome back. This is Talking Overwatch. Now it's called Talkwatch because there's like way too much letters in the title, which is because this one's going to be about the finals, narratives, myths, and all that stuff about Overwatch. And this time I'm going to introduce everybody because I've decided to change my title. But first I'll go with the others. Volamel, obviously the Overwatch writer, the guy I call the last Highlander of the Overwatch content creators, just because he has somehow survived not being poached by a team yet. We will see if that continues to happen. Then there's Yiska, another writer and also a sandbag investigator of the highest order, as far as I'm concerned. And then there's me. I've decided to promote myself to an Overwatch analyst because if the standard is actually you're allowed to vote for an 040 player as an MVP, not even just just an MVP of the league. You know what? If that's the standard we're going by, I may as well call myself like the greatest Overwatch expert in the fucking world at this point. So, why not? Why not? Right? And so we're gonna get into it. And there's a lot of different things to discuss here, but I guess we'll go first into the games, and then we'll leave the heat for a little bit later when we get into the other stuff. So, what'd you guys think of the playoffs and finals in general? But I guess we'll go with the finals just because I feel like that was the most recent.
Yeah,
Very
finals
easy.
were a little bit, not my favorite ever. It felt very, I don't know. I got like a very like GSL vibe of like
It was a GSO vibe, wasn't it? Oh, it was
Yeah.
classic.
just kind of your typical kind of weak final. If we would have had like Philly New York as the final, I think that would have been really exciting. But can't really complain. You know, the show itself was really well put together. Obviously, there was some bad points, but overall, a lot of energy in the stadium. Philly showed up in a big way. Philly fans were all there. New York was flooding the floor seats. Lots of New York jerseys. Everybody, was there to rep, and Philly was definitely out in force. But apparently, the team just didn't match that same energy, unfortunately.
What about you, Yiska? What did you think of it?
For me, I thought it was going to be an LSD trip, where you go over several hours. It was really just a DMT one where you go like 10 minutes, like maximum ecstasy. It's all done, especially because basically I'm taking the title of Prophet's Prophet. If you, right? Like in that regard,
absolutely.
it's someone like Destiny actually wrote a fan fiction for me, and it's on my nightstand now, and I'm telling you, it's a little bit sticky. So I don't know. In that regard, it was obviously in the way I envisioned the most likely scenario over the season. I would say that definitely happened. I went into the finals saying 60-40 London, and in the way it actually turned out, well, it was more dominant than that now in hindsight, right?
Yeah. So here's what I thought as somebody who's now an Overwatch expert, but actually not an Overwatch expert in any regard, but somehow, by the standards of late, I am, right? So here's what I actually thought was, there was this thing that, I forget, who was on the last show with Thorn on Oversight? Like, it was like ZP, I think?
ZP and
Yeah,
Bren, yeah.
yeah. I think ZP basically bring up a point where he's like, yeah, he thinks Philly will win because he thinks London will like fall under the pressure and choke, right? And like that was like that was his premise basically, because I assume he was just basically running the numbers like, well, they were shit for like 3 months or whatever, or 2 months. It might have been 2 months actually, and like no, they got it together for like 2 weeks. Is it really going to continue or something weird like that, right? And my actual argument was actually like it's the reverse. It's like Philly should be way more under pressure because none of them have like that kind of experience. Like I think basically London tweeted out, "Oh yeah, basically these three players are literally undefeated in every tournament they've been to." It's like so they know what it's like up there, whereas these Philly guys don't. And on top of that, it's just the way London plays the game. Like there's this famous quote from a Dota 2 player. His name is March, and this is for those who don't know, he's like a Korean player for MVP. And Korea, unlike Overwatch, basically literally only had 5 players, 6 players max that were on a professional level that were good. But these guys, like, they way overperformed past like what their infrastructure or whatever or salary. They didn't even have fucking servers. Like they like way overperformed. And the way they did it was they created a style and identity where it's called Caveman Dota, where they basically like punch you in the face. They just keep attacking you over and over and over. Because think about it. Like, this is basically what happened in their style of play is they would take a fight, and then usually after you take a fight and you win the fight, you would take an objective. So in Dota 2, that would be the tower. In Overwatch, that would be like taking the point. What these guys would do, like, oh, we won the fight. Let's go and take another fight. We won that fight. Let's take a third fight. And they would just keep fighting over and over and over again. And they would just keep ramping up the pressure over and over and over. And basically, his reasoning for why they caused so many upsets during their reign in like 2015 was basically this: people crack when they get rushed at over and over and over again. It's like very similar to, I think, one of the NFL players, I forget, is like
Marshawn Lynch.
Yeah, that exact line is like, it's hard when some guy just runs at you over and over and over again, right? And that's exactly the way London played. So I thought, you know what? Just because of the way they play, just because of this final setting, just because Philadelphia have way less experience, I think they're going to crack under the pressure. And I think that's kind of what happened here. Like, they didn't play nearly as well as I thought they did in like the semifinals or the quarterfinals, or arguably even like in the regular stage, because I didn't feel like Carpe was that effective compared to his normal self. Though that partly is because like Gesture's like ridiculous.
Yeah. I think they smothered him quite a bit. I think that their game shut him down and really smother him, I guess is the best word I can kind of come up with. Gesture was on him like white on rice. Like, it was pretty decisive in that sense, where you still had that Gesture Profit synergy where they were diving in. Gesture, like, I can't really sing his praises enough.
Yeah,
probably the world's best eraser right now, on top.
Oh yeah,
top 3 at Winston, and even he only played, I think, a little bit of Reinhardt on Kings Row B, but for the most part it looks solid. Granted, it wasn't like a large data point, but for the most part you've got two large characters in this specific meta under your belt, and you're top 3 in the world. At like, it's difficult to kind of say otherwise. It's difficult to get any space when you have somebody that dominant in front of you.
To me, what was very interesting was not only did we see like the staples that we already recognized, like in the beginning of the season, these eco jumps from Gesture, where out of nowhere he suddenly gets boombox transcendence without really any. In the first series, I think it was on Oasis. I think it would have been Gardens, where they somehow miraculously turn it around at. Like, it looks like they're just stalling and trying to get to 99, but no, it's actually like Gesture baiting out the Transcendence, and they somehow win it on the back of that. These things were all there, but it's also that sometimes actually London brought the very same strategy they were battered by in the Stage 2 playoffs to Philly, meaning that they played offbeat Overwatch in the sense that maybe they conceded a first death, but somehow someone just pulls off something insane and they're back in the fight, right?
Yeah.
Whether it's Profit, whether it's Birdring, even Jesh had those moments. Fury had them. So this was all that London was over the season, and really, characterized them. Plus, what the other teams also did to them.
Yeah, basically, like, this is the ultimate form of London that we expected. Not expected, but hoped for, I guess. This might be the better word to...
Oh, definitely hope for. Definitely hope for.
Like, basically, I did call this team, like, Dr. London and Mr. Spitfire. Like, one of them is shit, and the other one is, like, fucking amazing, right? And, like, because the one that's so fucking amazing makes you want to believe every single time, but, like, it doesn't happen that often. Like, even in this playoffs, it's like, Dr. London showed up for the first best of 3, and then all of a sudden they went, full, like, Spitfire or some shit, like, the rest of the way. It was fucking crazy, right? And this is like a team I was like looking at specifically, just because when you think about Overwatch, like, I agree to this like general sentiment that the team identity, the team play, and the leadership are generally the core aspects of what makes a good Overwatch team, right? Like, there's a reason like LA Valiant made it this far. It's not like they have like the craziest players, but I'm of the opinion of like PPD, I guess, was like, yeah, you can have all that stuff, but you're gonna need a polarizing player. You're gonna need players that like break open the entire thing when you're down, and it just happens that London actually has like a bunch of them. And when you combine that with like when they get all the other stuff fixed, their potential ceiling is way higher than basically almost everybody in this league.
Yep, that was the kind of big storyline for me, at least, was, you know, they finally showed that everything's starting to glue together after, you know, shedding a lot of the dead weight on the roster, you know, to Yiska's
after the revolution.
Yes, after the rebellion, we finally have a starting 6 and, you know, a substitute if need be.
The original 6.
It's finally glued together, and it's holding, but can it hold in the finals was my big question. You know, can this team keep it together? They've proven themselves before. Can they do it again? You know, obviously, you know, in agreement with Yiska, I did have London probably, you know, with a slight less of an edge, but still an edge nonetheless, and then it just continued to grow from there. As the games went on, especially after Friday. After Friday,
it was fucking over.
It was decisive enough.
Like,
yeah, it was like, this is like 75% London.
I actually thought
unless Philly comes out.
I actually thought they won the map. No, I mean they won the series when Prophet like ruined Volskaya.
Oh yeah,
like I literally thought like
the arena was.
I literally thought he like broke their souls. Like, oh, this is over. Like, he just 1v5'd everybody. Get the fuck out. Like. Yeah. That's literally what I thought happened. I was like, oh, okay, it's over. Congratulations, Prophet. You are the MVP, right?
Yeah. And I'll give you one more. Statistically, that wasn't an outrageous series, even in context of Prophet's overall performance. Nobody was watching. This kid has been doing this the inside, maybe not, you know, as, you know, flamboyantly outward, like with these super clutch plays, but like he's been carrying. He has been device-ish, you know, if you follow CSGO. The guy that always gets like 2 kills, that very often gets the opening kill, but also the second important one where then you seal the fight with that, right? That's Prophet for you the entire season. And for some reason that wasn't recognized until you could no longer deny him, where he just had those crazy plays. And one else has to say, for me, yes, Carpe was also a big name for coming in the finals for me. Like, literally, my MVP vote, if someone had asked me, would have probably been, over the season, it would have been Carpe, Jonak, and Prophet in no particular order, right? And that was an absolute demolishing of Carpe, or a really hard underperformance, possibly one of his worst.
Could be both, series. You know, there's an element of both in there. I think that he did show up at certain times, but it felt like they just smothered him. I feel like he just had no room to breathe and really suffered under all those circumstances, never really being on a huge stage, not having the experience to be on that stage. So again, you're getting a little bit of that emotional factor, but yeah, it was rough.
No, that's like basically he's playing against like Gesture Reborn in a sense, and then say he survives that, all of a sudden he's like, oh yeah, then you got to deal with Prophet. And you're not winning those like 50-50. You're like not what the way Prophet was playing in general. It's like you're rarely gonna win those 50-50 even if you're like Carpe. So it's like maybe it looked worse than it did just because in comparison like Prophet was literally murdering everything. But going into the finals, I think I did say like the 2 MVPs for me were either Prophet or Carpe. And I was kind of leaning towards Carpe just because his team was way weaker individually. But, like, after this, it's pretty obvious it has to be Prophet, right?
Yeah.
Even though I have to say, overall, I think the rhetoric that we saw in hindsight about Prophet was probably not fair to the other Spitfire players, because Fury had a nuts performance. But Dawson was most definitely the best.
Remember him on Kings Row?
I think he was the best. He's the best. They have Bedosin, Gesture, and Fury as like the best players of their role, like straight up.
Yeah, and also his versatility. Even if like a Jonak couldn't, you know, they somehow couldn't play that one support meta where Bedosin can pull out a great Roadhog, gets a load of first kills and whatever, right? It has pretty good synergy with gesture and everything like that. So
I don't know exactly about that. I would agree that maybe New York, and I don't want this to be super tangential, but I agree that New York probably isn't very comfortable with the single support meta. But Bedosen's definitely shown that he has the flexibility. His Ana looked really good. His Roadhog on Junkertown looked really good. Like, he has other heroes. I just don't know if New York as a team can play with those in mind. I don't know if they were super comfortable with this single support meta. So just an aside.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I guess we may as well use that to parlay to the next topic then, because when we talk about Overwatch League playoffs, like, this format's never been used before, and like, I had a lot of questions for it. I'm sure you guys did too. So now that's all been played out, what do you think of this best of 3, best of 5?
Because of the way that the final ended up going, it definitely didn't lend itself to being really entertaining. Me personally, and the people that I was with, we all kind of went into Saturday, there was a couple of Philly diehards with us. They were holding out, they had the faith, but for the most part, it was pretty weak. You kind of knew that what to expect for the most part. I can expect maybe in the future teams to be able to prepare a little bit more. I think Philly definitely didn't enjoy the fact that they had no stage experience. Or a very large stage. Not to say that it affected them too badly, but I think you would be hard pressed not to ask any of those players if the crowd, affected them even a little bit subconsciously. So maybe it's a prideful thing to say it didn't, but I think it definitely didn't help, I would say.
If you actually remember the play that Prophet had on one guy on Tracer, I think he first kills someone and then he walks up to Carpe and one clips Carpe from the back or something.
Yeah, like Carpe challenges him and one clips him.
Yeah, Carpe didn't look very comfortable on Tracer at all.
No, he didn't actually. I don't think he looked at him at all.
Oh, okay. No, I know. Yeah, probably didn't then. Like, I just remember him killing 5 people instantly in like 3 seconds. Yeah. That's what I remember. It's like, oh wow, that was fast. Oh, that's the point. It's like, oh shit. But just because there's been some discussion, like, I know the LA Valiant guy was like the coach, I think, Moon, is like basically like, yeah, I think it's more beneficial if you actually start from the lowers, like from the quarterfinals rather than the semifinals, because you get more warmed up or whatever. But whereas, like, I think Harshaw's like, no, it makes way more sense if you start in the semifinals because you get way more fucking data about whoever's coming forward. And the way I'm thinking about it is, like, just the way the Overwatch League is formatted, it doesn't make sense the way the playoffs work compared to, like, the regular season, because the regular season lasts like fucking forever.
Sure.
Whereas, like, the playoffs, which are, in my opinion, the most important part of the season, don't last nearly as long. And so, like, the way I change it is probably I just add in 2 more teams, make it a full 8-team bracket rather than just this weird 6-team one, so everybody gets the chance to warm up in the quarterfinals.
Sure.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. But it's also, you could also drag them out more.
Mm-hmm.
Like, why do you have to play
give
the
them
second?
A little bit more of a break.
Yeah.
Yeah, like, if you have 3 best of 5s, play 1 best of 5 a week.
Yeah.
That would really, allow more, customization of strategies, and would probably increase the level of play as well, and would certainly help with the hype too. But yes, I agree that the 8-team format is probably a necessity, simply because I'm not convinced that Coach Moon's argument of not being warm being a disadvantage, that EQO, for instance, so readily dismissed, isn't actually a thing. We don't know. I don't think we can know. I don't think anyone can speak on this topic with authority. We have pretty balanced stats in that regard, for instance, from professional sports, though obviously there's the physical element that plays a huge part. We had one-sided stats from CS, for instance, that since then has more or less equalized, or it hasn't been as radical anymore. Maybe also the teams learned how to cope with that or whatever. Or the nature of the teams, you could argue, currently is, like, if you're not playing that strategical Counter-Strike, maybe, if you Maybe you don't need to be warm or whatever. All that could be the case. It's just, do you want to take the chance? You know, and also, do you want to cheat yourself out of a potentially pretty good series, right?
Yeah.
Because like you're basically cutting down on 2 matches by only having 6 in the playoffs.
Yeah. Like the only other instance I can think of is like the general double bracket in like Street Fighter or FGC games or Melee games, and there's actually no conclusive evidence either way as to which one's more advantageous. Generally speaking, it's almost always better to go into winners finals because
of course,
you get double chances. But there have been cases where like the guy who came from the lowest felt like he built up a lot more momentum because like the guy who knocked him out, like he had to basically like grind himself up, like basically like put himself into peak form to re-challenge him again. But like even those chances are like pretty rare, and like yeah, in general, I don't actually really buy the argument like, oh, we weren't warmed up. I just felt like you guys weren't good enough. Sorry, like that's just how I felt. Speaking of people who weren't good enough, what do you think of the NYXL during this meta? Because like we all thought they were the favorites, right, before everything started.
Yeah, no, I definitely was pretty adamant that I thought they were going to do very, very well, and they looked promising. To be honest with you, I thought that their first game against Philly was a lot of hubris. They came out, didn't play Libero and Hanzo at all. Tried to get a little too fancy, putting Pine on Genji again. Libero has a great Genji. Just trying to do a little bit too much to lead into the grand finals, trying to play that perfect game to save face and try to hide information. And you saw that paradigm shift in the second game where Libero was in a lot of the time, and I'm sure there's a lot of things. There's more to that than what we know as public information, but yeah, for me it was a lot of overconfidence, and yeah, they weren't as comfortable in this meta, but for the most part it was still same old New York. They looked to find really, really key set plays that looked really, really good. But I think if you give them another week and maybe try to convince Wizard Young to play Libero just a little bit more, I think they still do very, very well.
I still think there's probably a rational explanation that makes sense if the coaches explain it to you.
Yeah.
Also, by the way, this entire sandbagging narrative was like the debunction, is that a word? The debunction of the sandbagging thing. A, it definitely doesn't mean that they didn't sandbag.
Yeah, exactly.
B, it doesn't mean sandbagging was the reason they were playing terribly. Because C, there was a pretty huge patch, and we have empirical data that strongly suggests that patches completely make or break your season.
Yeah.
Right?
They absolutely do.
Or your stage. Right? So to somehow conclude that this is some gotcha against the people that said they were sandbagging, or that sandbagging is somehow hubris or whatever, like, you're not in that team. You don't know how these players, are they at their wits' end, right? Are they really running thin, and they need that? And they've earned that right to not go full throttle.
Yeah.
And by the way, it was still probably the third best team in that stage where they completely took the foot off the pedal. That doesn't necessarily suggest to me that they couldn't have ramped it up during the season, because newsflash, dudes, who was also sandbagging, and that's a definition type of thing, but London wasn't playing their best roster over the season, and no matter what you want to call that, they weren't honing that, final 7 that they had.
They already had the final 7 to begin with.
And in the end, they somehow miraculously found, by the way, Spitfire, hey, I can consult for you. I pretty much said that before everything happened. Like, jokes aside, obviously that
I mean, Bishop knew too, but he was outed. The revolution took him first.
The thing is, from Jack's press conference, he said that it was very hard to run these two teams. I can totally believe that. If you want to call that sandbagging, no matter what actually happened was, most teams have an up and down during the season. you don't have a consistent team other than Shanghai Dragons, who is consistently dog shit.
Still have MVP votes though, but yes.
So the thing is, maybe the idea behind maybe we go off the pedal in order to peak in the playoffs is not actually that dumb. That's actually what happened to London and to Philly, right? Mm-hmm. And it's also that, but why not? Is nobody concluding that from the data we have? That's definitely also not a given. But that's
so.
Let
me interject real fast. Do you think that it was purposeful that London took their foot off the pedal, or was it like it just kind of happened that the pedal broke and they reassembled it as quickly as possible and ended up, making a better pedal? You know what I mean? Like, I don't know that it was purposeful. Like, yes, I completely agree that they seem to have practiced way more for the tougher opponent in the regular season, but when it came to like stage 3 and stage 4, it definitely felt like the roster just kind of fell apart. Birdring had wrist injuries. He's been very public in saying that it wasn't just wrist injuries. There was other problems that he had suffered as well, whether it was mentality, whether it was, just motivation. It all seemed to kind of come together in the final. So I don't know if purposefully taking your foot off the pedal, like what, so again, this is a question to you. Like, do you think it was purposeful? Like, were they actually sandbagging in stage 3 and stage 4, or was it more of like a circumstantial thing?
I think it was,
or a little bit of both.
Civil War.
A little bit of both, in the sense that I think that some of them were maintenance players, where some of those players were so far away from a starting spot, and B, they really needed
Hurek was decent by the end. He was pretty good at the end.
Hurek,
for what I thought he was,
had a space in Spitfire simply because during his wrist injury, Birdring was that bad.
Yeah. He was like an okay sub, but even then, like, his hero pool just didn't fit any of these metas. Like, he could have actually been okay in the finals because Farah was like pretty good on certain maps, especially like Eichenwald, but it didn't seem like it was better than Prophets.
Yeah.
No, that's also the thing. Yeah.
But back to your point.
But yes, I think there was an element of, because if you look at who they were substituted in, obviously a little bit against the weaker teams, but not only. And then they they weren't substituted in for game 5. They were substituted in for the first 2 games, and then it's like, oh shit, main roster, now you gotta win 3 in a row, reverse sweep. And about 50% of the time that worked, and a lot of the time it didn't, right? So that basically also really messed with the record London had, where they actually had to win some games in the end of the season in order to even make it to playoffs. Well, they were second, I believe, for a large part of the season. Probably.
Yeah, first two seasons, I think, at least.
Yeah.
So, I don't know. I think if you want to call that sandbagging, because to me, sandbagging is simply, the definition would be, to me, to not try your hardest to win in any given situation. So to make moves that doesn't maximize your winning conditions in that specific game.
Yeah, like basically like London was sandbagging in season 1 when they threw their like B roster against Gladiators. It was like season 2 or whatever. And then like the last 2 were like, oh shit, Fisher's gonna take us out. And then they bring in the real roster, but then by then it was like too late, right? Like that's straight up sandbagging, right?
Yeah. I mean, in the most technical sense, I definitely think it is, but it's still smart. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
like you need to pace these players out. It's a marathon, not a sprint, so you can't have burnout. You know, we've seen it. It's been a narrative throughout the entire season. You've seen it with Gamsu. You've seen it with Pine. You've seen it run rampant throughout the entire season. You know, you've got Shanghai practicing nearly 13 hours a day, 7 days a week, no breaks. Like, this is the life of a pro gamer, and it's going to burn you out. So, like, yes, it is sandbagging, but it's actually intelligent to do so, because you don't want somebody like Prophet to be burnt on finals day where you need him to show up and do a Volskaya 5K. You know what I mean?
Yeah, basically it was like I get the feeling not a lot of people really understand the idea of like peaking into form.
Yeah.
So you should probably, if you don't, you should probably watch the like reflections that Thorne did with Fatality, because that's basically his fucking entire career.
Yeah.
Like basically, Fatality was like very early, like Quake Pro, and he had this idea is like, okay, so I have this specific event coming up in like 6 months, so I'm gonna slowly build up towards that event, and then I'm gonna do the crazy shit very close to the event, and then in peak form, that's when I'm at the event, and I'm gonna kill everybody in those 2 to 3 days. Right,
and that even transitions into like MMA, and I'm not like a huge MMA guy, but I kind of watch it a little bit. Like the fight camps aren't year round, right? Mm-hmm. It's like months beforehand, and before that, they're resting, they're relaxing, they're hanging out with friends, family, doing what they want to do, and then it's even in wrestling, like you cut weight, you know, maybe a couple weeks before your match and your meet. Like this isn't something that's new to even traditional sports, so it's very strange to me that the community is so against it.
Like if
it seems like it's a bad thing to them.
If I had to pick a reason, it's because you've all been Koreanized and you don't realize it.
Sure.
Like
we must practice 12 hours a day.
Yeah, legitimately, like all these people are thinking in a Korean mindset. It's like, oh, those guys, they're practicing 12 to 14 hours a day. That's like that's because it's been imprinted into them for their fucking culture. Like they do that shit for everything they do. Whereas like that's not actually that healthy. And like if you want to prove it, just go to look at all the League of Legends pros, look at all the Brood War pros, look at all the StarCraft 2 pros. Like almost all of them are burned out. Like these are players that have like maybe 3-4 year careers max, right? Like it's fucking intense. And like, you know what? The peak they reach at is like fucking ridiculous, but it's not gonna last very long.
Yeah. It's also that's exactly the thing why I think it's so important to take reporting these incidents very, very seriously, because don't pretend you've ever given as much as these players have in order to get there. If you're the average person, even if you could be a family father who also works 12 hours a day, you don't work 12 hours a day like they do. You just don't. You might maybe grinding, but they are applying themselves, and it's like it's something I couldn't fathom for myself to be able to endure for the durations that they do, right? Mm-hmm. So they also during a time where it's really in their formative years. Think of how young these some of these guys are. I'm not sure. Was there someone in the final that was older than 22? Maybe Poco?
Maybe.
I mean, Fraggy wasn't playing. He's obviously a wizard and is 214 years old, but
Gandalf the Grey over there.
Yeah.
But like that's why you have an obligation to tell that story in order so we can sort of transcribe that and do a little, you know, metaphorical like cookbook of their excellence, so we can not only consume it but maybe, you know, apply it a little bit in our lives, because the lessons that we get from there is basically our new mythology, I think. And that's also like I once wrote an article about this for a large part, because Germany is almost completely secular at this point, right?
Yeah.
I think like maybe 10% or less people actually go to church or consider themselves religious. I don't have stats on that, but it's nuts how many people watch soccer here, right? Mm-hmm. There are clubs where you can, as a lifelong fan, get buried in the stadium. They show up every weekend and sing songs in a designated stadium and sort of celebrate that unity, and from afar look at these players playing, never really get to interact with them much, but with the idea, with the concept that they represent. How is that fundamentally different from religion?
It's not at all. It's just being a part of something bigger. You know, it's something that I think a lot of people have actually studied a lot on, and it's kind of baked into the human condition that you are kind of always are looking for small groups of people that share the same ideals.
Right. So to build off of that, like basically one of the best things about the Brood War esports scene, if you guys don't know about it, is they were always very huge on the idea of like larger than life figures, right? So you have
Oh yeah.
so they actually had like the legitimately like the coolest nicknames of any like team I've heard of. Like yeah, Boxer, you're the fucking emperor. Like oh shit, that's fucking crazy. Yellow, you're the Storm Zerg. Jaedong's the tyrant. Flash is straight up god. Bisu, the revolutionist. Like they have all these different nicknames, right? And the point of these nicknames is like they represent aspects of not only their personality but aspects of human potential in a sense, right? And so that's always been like my thing about writing about following esports, about this competition stuff, is basically all these myths, if you want to call it that, are basically just abstractions of of human potential and the limits of that human potential. And that's why like when I talk about like the greatest players of all time, I get way more crazier talking about them than I do about like just a great player or a good player.
Yeah.
Or I guess in a sense, I suppose the Shanghai Dragons are an expression of limitless potential but at being shit. So just the opposite end of that, right?
Yeah.
But it's like that's kind of how it goes. Is like that's always been like that's in my opinion like the crux of the entire thing we call competition. Is that's why it's such an important endeavor, and it's also why you see like a lot of like the more hardcore fans generally just get like very angry or very tilted if like something is a little bit out of place. Or like I don't think he was that good, like or I guess in StarCraft 2 right now, like basically there was an article written by like one of my old TL writers. He basically said all the casters way overhype every single player, so all meaning becomes redundant because they're like this player is the best player in the world.
Yes.
Then a week later, this player is the best player in the world. A week later, this player is the best player in the world. And then it's like, no, you guys are all wrong. It's obviously MVP, but that's a different story for another time.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that I actually read your short piece on that like a little earlier, and yeah, I agree. Like I also had that problem with the talent for a while.
Mm-hmm.
My feeling is that they probably most definitely not because of that episode or whatever, but like the talent really stepped it up, and also I have to also say I didn't see it before. And but the content that was made for the finals, so in the run-up to the finals, especially on the last and first day, was a celebration of the concept that these people stand for, right? So they definitely managed that, even though, and that's a little minor quibble of mine, that's probably something that comes down to taste, not really, moral guidelines or whatever, but I thought it was a little bit... a little bit too, techno up and down camera stuff, like little bit too new,
edited,
I guess. Yeah, a little over edited in a way. Even though that's also probably maybe also the music choice. It was more mellow than the hype stuff that Apex was doing, right?
Sure.
It wasn't something I would be getting goosebumps from, but that would definitely sort of level me in order to be able to get them during the final series, right? That's a stylistic choice which I can definitely get behind, right?
I mean,
I personally would do it differently. Yeah,
I probably would have just jacked the Korean mythos for specifically for London Spitfire, because basically you have a bunch of Royal Roaders on that team.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And like
technically.
Yeah, right. They're still on there, and technically they are still walking the Royal Road because every new tournament they're still winning, aren't they? Like
they're still trotting along.
That's the fucking reality.
The only caveat I would add to that is that me personally, I value each stage as kind of like its own mini tournament. So it's like, while yes, major tournaments, they've always managed to find the Royal Road. It's those lesser kind of, I guess you could call them minor stages.
Like
here's
my problem with that. Is like, I actually agree with you. Like each of these stage finals should be a mini tournament in and of itself, right? And I actually think that was the case for the first three. I can't say the same for the fourth.
Yeah.
I cannot say the same for the fourth.
Snip, snip, snip. Let's go. Playoff soon. Come on. Like, get done.
Right? And basically, like, by the time the fourth one comes around, like, they all like, every team realized, wait, none of this really mattered to begin with. What we're doing, trying so hard, like, that's kind of like my problem with it. Is like they don't, just because like this league is so emphasized on the round robin format, and they don't like I think they have to incentivize these title stage matches into the Overwatch League Finals.
I think they will.
They have to do it in some way, right?
Will.
And then
whether it be points or,
and then that'll make it a huge deal. And like like the way I do it is like I'd probably do it like basically in StarCraft 2, there's this like award. It's called the Nest T Award. Basically, if you make 10 GSL appearances in a row, you get the Nest T Award, because that's like a form of excellence in and of itself. It's like you get that far. Like I'd probably be like, okay, well, and the NYXL should get an award because they showed up in like fucking every stage playoff somehow, right? Like, because that's like a level of excellence that's not going to be met for a long time.
No,
unless...
I doubt that that's ever going to happen again. Like,
right.
I'd be shocked if we ever got a Shanghai Dragons and an NYXL season 1 again, honestly.
Wait, I believe the Shanghai Dragons can do it. I believe they can go 0-80.
Not with 4 expansion teams. Like, I don't know. That's got to be rough.
No,
I can't imagine.
No, the reason is because one of the expansion teams, I'm pretty sure it's going to be Chinese. That's my reason.
Sure, yeah.
Because
reportedly,
that Chinese team is going to take all the good talent.
Possible. It's possible.
Because every Chinese player will probably. This is like a side tangent, but basically, like, we're talking about, like, you know how like there's like God Kings, there's Kiros, and then there is like the Trash, and then there is like the fucking Pacific Landfill. That's basically the Shanghai Dragons we're talking about. So, a kind of mythos, a kind of mythology, just of the worst type.
I guess.
Right, but. Yeah,
I think that whole idea has already infected people. Just earlier before the show, I read a tweet where someone was like, "We should fill the Atlanta with X minority,"
yeah.
And I was like, "Okay," and people should forget about winning as much, and it should get away from the idea that you have to win in sports and just celebrate whatever these players stand for. I'm like. Like, you know, like hanging from the ceiling at the notion of that being.
Oh
like,
my god!
Like basically, this is actually one of my problems with like Overwatch League. Is like basically if you sell off the idea of winning matters the most, you're left with like nothing. In a sense, like I feel like that's the actual soul of any competition, is the idea of that winning matters the most of any priority. Like it differs from player to player how much it matters. Like, not every player is going to be like, fucking get right. Like, oh, yeah, I am in pain. Or not every player is going to be like MVP. Oh, I got 5 slip discs. I'm going to still win this fucking GSL. Yeah. Like, you can't fucking stop me, right? Like, I'm not talking about that much, but, like, every player does, in a sense, want to win. But if you sell off the idea that winning is not the most important thing, then you've sold off everything, basically, right? Like, that's a huge problem for me.
You're actually just deep down diving into relativism, right? That's the appealing part about games in general, that you have objective win conditions where as soon as you opt in, this is basically, you know, you win when you do this, and the machine, especially in esports, decides, okay, objectively, you won, right? You scored more points or whatever, right? It's not like in real life where you could say, my boss, he thinks I'm a lazy ass. I also really didn't show up twice to work, but like now my measurement of success is how much leisure time I have a week. Like, yes, you can definitely, you know, walk your way out of the win conditions of life. You can't do that in games. Everyone agrees this is what winning is, right? And as soon as you devalue that, and it's keep in mind, you're free to do that, and there's a lot of entertainment opportunities for you. Like there are specifically like pseudo sports set up for you, which you can enjoy. You can go to a WWE event, right? You can watch sports anime if you want, right? That's all for you. This is for tryhards, right?
Yeah.
Like, so I don't know.
Like,
this is deeply troubling.
Like, all right, here's the way I'll put it. Like, the reason I keep going back to MVP, but that's because I think he's like the most important like player to ever grace StarCraft 2. But basically, like the reason MVP is like like it's been like what 6 years since this guy's played, or 5 years since this guy's played, and not even like a top level. Like he was real shoddy by the end, right? Yeah. But like the reason like this guy is like mythologized so much is because, well, partly because of me, technically, because I wrote a shitload of articles. Let's be fair. I wrote a shitload of articles. but the other reason is like the only reason I wrote these articles is because this guy is like he's fighting in his like. He's fighting with like all those injuries. He's fighting against the meta itself. He's fighting against the worst imbalance we've ever seen, right? Like these are all things that, and he still like pushed his way through and won, right? Or like, actually, the other most important player would be like Sue, right? And this guy has never won a GSL, but he has been through the most GSL finals in the world. But like because he hasn't been there, you understand like how important, how critical this one victory is, and how like it doesn't even matter how great you are as a player, because like Sue could go down right now as like the greatest of all time player. I can make that argument, right? Even though he has never won a GSL, but he will never have that GSL victory, and that's always going to like be something against him. That's always going to be something out of his reach. There's one thing that he can never have, right? And that's what sticks in people's minds. It's not like, oh, he was kind of good, or like this guy's kind of funny, or this guy was like, you know what I mean? It's like there's. Yeah, in order to become this great competitive scene, you need these, like, people call them like larger than life figures, larger than life narratives, or whatever. But the thing about that is like you don't actually, like, as a person who writes all this stuff, like you don't actually need to do any of the hard work. Like it just naturally comes to you because you just watch the game, and that'll tell you exactly what's happening within the realm of the mythos, so to say.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
And so like when you sell that off, I feel like you're losing something so integral. It's like really painful. It's also why like it's also why I get super pissed, like people are voting for Shanghai Dragons players, or like people actually put them in their top 3 MVP votes. Like Jesus Christ.
Yeah. I think that thing is problematic simply for the reason that we have a fairly established concept of MVP. At least we have a range, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it's not like the concept of MVP is something that's invented for the Overwatch League. This has a long history of relevance across all sports, right? So, and it's differently framed in other sports. It's mostly an American thing, I would say.
Sure.
But to then reframe that debate, I think is in itself problematic. But even more so, and you pointed that out at some point to me, Joe, it's even more problematic because we have an award that, awards the people for the values that these other people who for instance, I went German there for a second, who for instance, celebrated Gregory, who is celebratable as a person. By the way, 100%. It's not only about the champions. Like, for instance, the story that Stucci was talking about earlier about the guy that never made it, but always made it to the finals, is possibly even more valuable for
that's Runaway
society as a whole. Right?
That's the underdog story.
Exactly.
You know what I mean?
Yeah, basically, this guy I'm talking about is like he doesn't just represent like himself. He actually represents StarCraft 2, maybe as an esports, like this game that's almost made it there, but never quite made it.
Sure.
But in a more greater idea, it's like about the person who almost always makes it there, but doesn't make it. But critically, the difference between like Sue and every other loser, and I mean that in like the classical sense of like second is the first place loser, is Sue gets back up every single fucking time, right?
Right.
Like,
always gets back there.
Like that is the most destructive thing you can have happen to a highly competitive player, is to almost make it. Like there's been studies made like in the Olympics, like third place is always happier than second, because second knows he could have made it. Second knows they were like an inch away. Sue's done that like 8-9 times by now. Like this guy is ridiculous. Even though like mentally speaking, he's obviously like a choker, but like if you're just talking about his like sheer willpower, his resilience, he's probably the highest you've ever seen, right? Like that's like ridiculous.
That's also, if you think about it, that's also why it's misguided to think it's mean if you actually talk badly about a bad team. Mm-hmm. Because just for the anime avatars necessarily watching this, right? Think of how every single shonen starts. the main character is almost always an absolute loser.
Yeah.
Like, is bullied by people, is really an outsider, and at the end, he works through the ranks and through, you know, hard work, determination, values that make him up. That's the metaphorical pathway, right, for him.
Mm-hmm.
So if I say Shanghai Dragons is terrible, I'm automatically setting up Shanghai Dragons, not only the organization, but the players that actually had the guts to stay with the organization for another season.
God, please don't do that.
For an incredible redemption arc that might happen. We don't know.
I mean, it's possible.
But imagine how much better that feels if you already have. You don't need to overdo it. You just have to call a spade a spade.
Yeah.
Because as Lucia says, the game or the season tells you the story, and you just need to fairly report it. And then what if they get to playoffs next season? What, like,
that would be fucking
you're
shocking.
Now, it would be shocking, but you're actually also cheating yourself out of the wham that this redemption arc would have. Because currently you're like, you know, like, Ado is probably like one of the best players in the league, and Dia is one of the best players in the league, and Gregory is one of the best players in the league. Like, if you believe that and they get to playoffs, and it's like, well, of course. Well, I already thought that. Like, if they get 3-0 play, that's right. Like, you're cheating yourself out of the emotion of what reality would provide you with, right? And that's the entire issue. And it's also genuinely nothing against the people in that organization. When we're talking about the players, we're talking about the entity of playership that this person has. I'm not talking about if he's a nice guy or whatever, right?
Yeah.
It's like, if I say, for instance, I'm a teacher, then this is my job, this is my vocation, where you can criticize me in that department, and that doesn't necessarily or might not at all reflect on me as a person, depending on what kind of issue you have with it.
Right, yeah.
So I think the identification, also the taking that criticism so personally, as if it was to say, like, the essence of your spirit is rotten. No, that's actually not what we're saying. We're saying you're clicking pretty badly right now. That's all we're saying, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So basically, that's how I feel. That's how you guys feel. All right. I guess I'll wrap this up with one last question. Basically, is the World Cup a better form of contenders than contenders? Like, straight up, I'm just asking you.
That's a spicy one. I would say no, because a lot of teams don't treat it like contenders. They don't treat it as a way to develop, as a way to facilitate new players. Like, if you look at a team like Sweden, right? It's a lot of now to their credit, there's not a lot of players out there that have the track record and have the experience that some of these players have. But when you look at their recent performance, you wonder, could they have made a better roster? I've looked at it. It looks to me like it's a fairly, good roster, but there again, it's just made up a bunch of old boys that probably aren't going to be able to do that great. There's even question marks around some of the players, even in other teams, France. There is a lot more to it. That seems more like an entertainment favored exhibition rather than like winning at all costs. You know what I mean? Like, it's that dichotomy between, like you guys were mentioning, if you forfeit winning, then it just becomes, relative to the person. And it's this format, it's this kind of the way that it's handled, it feels more entertainment than just winning. Like, and even then, it's like, well, Korea's probably just going to steamroll you anyways. So there's that. But it's digressing past that, it is more about celebrating the nation and the players that represent it, and it's about kind of joining hands, going to the bar with friends, just like it is in soccer. And by no means am I an expert in football and soccer, so correct me if I'm wrong, but it feels like it's more of a togetherness celebration rather than it is, boy, I hope Spain wins because they're got this player and this player, and all this matchup's really like nobody's really going in depth with stats. It's we're here to represent Spain. We're hoisting South Koreans and Mexico on their shoulders. It's about the people rather than just winning. And I think that's exactly what the World Cup and Overwatch kind of represents as well. Yes, it's a little too early to be at that level where we're hoisting people up in the streets, but I think it's about the entertainment and what it represents rather than just specifically winning.
I think I'll hit you with from two angles here. So the first thing is that Caracol actually did an analysis on this last year, and for Overwatch League recruitment, the World Cup had more impact on rosters than you would necessarily think because of how
for sure,
important players took that competition. So the shining example of this is EQO, obviously.
Yeah.
Right. Like a guy on a tier 3 or tier 4 Israeli team, pretty known on ladder apparently, even though that's a statement I usually hear in hindsight. No pro player actually ever came out and was like, damn, I played a game against EQO, like he's so good. It's always in hindsight where it's like, of course he was great. Like, I'm not sure how much credence you can give to that, but it's even in the games of Israel, yes, he was the outstanding player on that team. But if I would think if he doesn't make it to that World Cup and also gets the connections and whatever, I don't think he makes it onto the Fusion. And how these two universes next to each other, it's obviously that you want one with EQO because he has developed into a really fine player that really transformed the Fusion into a
arguably the best Western player, like non-Korean player. Like the only other guy I can think of is maybe Space. That's it.
Yeah. Yes. About it.
It also seems I'm currently planning content on the concept of the nucleus or the emotional leader that every team pretty much needs to have. It's for instance that's what Fissure also brought to the Gladiators, right?
Dictatorship.
Where they didn't have that.
I mean, basically.
I'm not even joking. I think they need a dictatorship, and they got it.
That's one form, right?
Yeah.
And then there was a coup, obviously.
Yeah, obviously a coup. Hey, it worked.
Reportedly.
They should have accepted dictatorship into their lives just because they're from America. They should have realized democracy isn't always the answer. Sometimes you need a tyrant. Please don't flag me for that.
Joe's already like...
No fines, guys.
Fissure Castro.
Ooh, I like that
one. No, but the second approach is basically, I think we're all in agreement, even the players, that World Cup isn't a tournament that we take seriously. Now, there's two things I have to say about this. My initial thing is to say, let's look at the system that the World Cup is. We have no incentive structure in the sense of prize money because everyone gets the same. Systematically it's made up to not mean as much. I also think, and watch Volamel's eyes here, because in a second you will flip them over, I also despise the concept of tribalism in general around around World Cups in general. But here's the big but, and there's actually where I will do a 180, I think, in my coverage of the World Cup, where I will say people who produce content and also who have connections to the people who produce content that has more exposure than we do, I think we can help push the World Cup into meaningfulness. Because obviously, the concept of nation versus nation and a game being played that way is the biggest, not just sporting event, but probably shared recreational or at all event that we have as a human race. It's the Soccer World Cup, right? So if that format has that potential, because most of the players also donate their their earnings and whatever, it's not about that. It's about what it stands for, right? And if we can get past that nihilism of what we perceive the World Cup to be, also now that we don't have anything else in the off season as it seems like, I think if we sit together, not just writers and content creators, but also players, and we all decide that this actually is very meaningful, even though Korea will win in the end, then
Korea did win in the end in Overwatch League, and that was pretty meaningful, wasn't it?
Yeah, true. Yeah, but like, if we can do that, I think we will have a year-round great experience of Overwatch, because I'm already loathing like these fun events for basically half the year now, right?
Yeah.
That really lessens, and that's, I mean, it's fine that people want that, and again, like, I'm not saying that my approach to Overwatch or my conception of sports in general or esports is the optimum or should be abided by everyone. You can have your fun stuff, right? I would probably look forward to another takeover, for instance. I would show up there, right? Even though it's not as serious of a tournament. But I think the concept, the system behind the World Cup has empirically shown too much potential to be wasted away in meaning in how we're doing it now for 2 consecutive years in Overwatch. I think we can make it much more meaningful in the future, and maybe you could even like say to writers, maybe produce content that hypes up the crowd, because that's also a measurement of meaning, right? How does the crowd react? Does the emotion that the players have like reflect on the players, or is the crowd hyped and then it reflects on the players because there's suddenly a crowd of 10,000 people?
It's almost like there's a
and
position for that, you know? It's almost like that there's a community voted position that is exactly what you're saying, of a content manager that pushes forth content to do so. And that's not shade to anybody in particular, but that's just a way to make this more important. And I think that job right now is not being taken very seriously, and I want to see it being pushed forward in the future. I want to see more content being put out around these teams, and I haven't seen it personally. I've seen a little bit from a little bit of these teams. I think a little bit from Sweden, you know, doing a piece on Reinforce, or doing like a small little interview, which is great. That's awesome. But I want everybody to do that. I want to see more of that. I want to, you know, get the people interested in this, because we still have to find the main subreddit. We're still the tiny 10% of the Overwatch population. 1.3 million subscribers are on the main Overwatch subreddit, and none of them really care about any of this. World Cup, this is the way we get a hold of them and say, look, this is really cool, and here's why. And there's a job for that, and people have been, you know, elected into those positions, so I want them to take it seriously.
Right. So the reason I brought up... Okay, go ahead, actually.
But by the way, in that regard, DJ Khaled was actually the biggest success in terms of the Overwatch League and how it was perceived on the main subreddit. 15,500 upvotes, my dudes.
Yiska smart, Yiska grateful, Yiska loyal.
Another one.
Yeah, another one. All right, so the reason I brought this up is because I actually do think the World Cup, as it functions right now, is a better version of Contenders than Contenders. And here's the reason why. Obviously, Contenders is actually technically better in terms of getting players to get good, getting teams to get to understand what it means to be a team, all that good stuff. But here's the point. It runs at the same time as Overwatch League, basically. Almost the entire same time. And so if you're actually legitimately trying to get into an Overwatch League team, World Cup functions way better than Contenders.
No, yeah, it does. Because you're being forced to play with basically what would be Overwatch League caliber players. You know, if a Contenders player was to make it through, it's a giant stage to be able to not only, you know, really work together with these maybe potential teammates and show them on a very large stage what kind of things you offer, what kind of skill set you have, rather than just seeing it on a resume and being like, okay, you won this small event and this and that. Okay, great. We're actually putting, you know, the money where the mouth is, you know, in this metaphorical sense, where they're actually working with you. And like what Yiska said, you know, another big metaphor or kind of a drawing point to this point comes from the 2016 World Cup, where I don't know if Lunatic High looks the same if Zunba isn't a part of that World Cup team. I don't know if those tryouts are having behind the scenes, but
I don't know if Envious wins if Mickey wasn't part of that team.
Exactly. What happens if Mickey isn't a part of the Tyus team?
Yeah,
I don't know.
Yeah. So that's basically my contention. Is like because of the way the marketing works and the way players and owners and GMs work, like the personal impression is way stronger than like going through VODs. And I'm gonna go ahead and say it, like most of these people are overworked anyways. I doubt they actually have time to go through a bunch of Overwatch contenders VODs, even in just NA. And I'm not talking about the rest of the world, because like I'm gonna go ahead and guess there's gonna be a huge likely chance there's gonna be a bunch of great players coming out of not just Korea, obviously that's the big one that everybody should follow, because that's obviously like the biggest farming league, but like China, SEA, Europe. I'm gonna go ahead and guess there's gonna be a bunch of untapped potential in those regions, right? And in other games, like the fastest way to figure that out is you play against them. But in Overwatch League, you're all stuck in like this. You're all stuck in LA, basically playing against each other. So you don't really have time. You don't have time, or you don't have time to actually have those players meet them face to face. Because guess what? That's exactly how like Simple got into Na'Vi. He had to get booted out of CIS. He had to find Hiko. He had to go to NA, and then he had to beat the shit out of Na'Vi at a major. That's how he got his Na'Vi. That guy, he's a prodigy, like one in like a million. Like you've only got like 3 of those or so, right? And so, like, where's that guy in Overwatch League besides like the Koreans? Like obviously the Koreans are always rising up and shit. Like they're the most ridiculous things I've ever seen. Like you take out 40 of them and then another 40 rise up in Korea. But even outside of that, I'm gonna go ahead and say it, there's a high chance there's some. I won't say like they're simple level, but there's gonna be good players or great players in these other regions that are undiscovered, and they'll left to be undiscovered unless they go to the World Cup.
Also, I have to say, maybe there's even noble aspects or more understandable aspects in this. And I would have never said that this is actually, you know, a thing that I would think works or is valuable at all. But I think this season of Overwatch League, for the game Overwatch, has convinced me that the quality of a player to be coachable is actually very important. Like if I look at the successes of the season, so for instance, Boston went for coachable,
Valiant
went for coachable, Fusion went for coachable,
Envious went back to Korea. Yeah.
Like, and also the teams that didn't have coachable players, right? And who were, you know, where there were these internal struggles, this directly seems to be transition or like relating to the level of play that this team is able to play. The social components, also how I guess it's exacerbated by the format, how it's so tightly packed and like you basically can't take days off, or not a lot, or not a week, or whatever. I think it's very important that the social fabric of your team works that way. That's also why I think, no joke, I think Susie turned London season around too. Like to introduce, you know, that archetypical figure into a Korean team does wonders, right? It has the potential to change the entire social fabric, right? Sadly, we won't ever find out how big that actually was, because patches just overshadow these empirical data points we have, right? But
I mean, I do know like Runaway always thought it was a big deal that that person's wife, I forget her name, was like basically the manager of the team.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. And that's also the reason, like the values that Runaway has through Runner and his wife, and assume the way they also set up their staff, brings up every second season, if you want, every odd season, or regular even season, brings up a team that makes it to the finals, right?
Yeah.
Like, and also, that's not the Runaway we thought of initially. Yes, there are some players in there, such as Haxal and Stitch, that are constants, but it's still like, you know, a thing of ship of Theseus, right? Like, is that really the first Runaway that made the fourth finals in comparison? No, not really. Not in how they play. Not Stitch and Haxal are outstanding players. Not going to take away from it. But you don't usually win or get far in Overwatch with just DPS duos, right? So there seems to be this special quality about the makeup of Runaway. I actually was already tweeted about this. I think they not only have established these values, but they've also been able to communicate them to fans even better than the Overwatch League rosters have been so far. Granted, they had less time, but Runaway as a brand seems very authentic to me.
Yep.
There are technically already like they should have already been in the Overwatch League if this was based off of merit. I'll go ahead and say it. Like
Yes.
Though to be fair, I've always thought like the idea like just the way that people frame it is like, is this team an Overwatch League contender like as in like does it deserve to be in the Overwatch League? I'm like, come on guys, you literally have Shanghai Dragons in there. Almost every fucking team in the world deserves to be Overwatch League if that's like the bottom of the standard, right? But yeah, like
Stucho, it's also the way there's 5 minutes in time that are different in a bunch of multiverses we have, and we actually these 5 minutes in time being the last 2 minutes of the game against Lunatic High in Season 2,
yeah,
and the last 3 minutes of the game against GC Busan in Season 4. In some multiverses, Runaway actually ekes them out, and our perception of Lunatic High being the best team pre-Overwatch League is completely destroyed. It's Runaway.
Yeah, it's like they actually have the Sue syndrome. It's like you get Sue literally like 3 games, he might be the greatest player of all time, unarguable. Like
Yeah.
It's like it's like that. There's like even though like they technically like fallen off, like on up, fallen off, like they're not like the super dominant force in Korea. I'll go ahead and say it. I think in terms of the culture, in terms of like what they've like consistently done throughout like the last 2 years, I think they're like by far like one of the better like orgs straight up we've seen, even without like the resources of like these sports teams or whatever.
Yeah.
So yeah,
For sure.
think about covers everything. Is there anything else you wanted to say about narratives, myths, Overwatch?
Not particularly.
Yeah. All right.